Threshold is key to being better at running. I can't stress that enough. It's a super important system to work at. It's where our body is most efficient at churning that lactate into energy. You must be running at that threshold effort. I knew today, 5 times 1.4 miles, I'm going to be running in that lovely effort, that lovely rhythm, that lovely feel. But I also know that I'm not going to beat my body up with that 7 days to go, the London Marathon. And that's so important. Maximum benefits, minimal cost on the body. Super important. All right, so before we jump in and I show you my 5 times 1.4 miles, it went really well. It was on that honey farm loop, and I'll show you footage while I'm talking. That went really well, 4:55 pace to 5 minutes, keeping that heart rate and the effort below that threshold. Because it's race week, we don't want to dump fatigue in the body, but we still want to keep the body moving. But threshold, in its basic terms, you have LT1, you have LT2. We're trying to run and train at a place where the body is at its most efficient at converting lactate into energy. I think this is the part that people don't really understand about threshold running or how lactate operates. When the muscles get too much lactate in them, we slow, right? That's really simple. As lactate builds up, we slow down. But what you don't understand is that your body was already producing more lactate in the body as a whole. So yes, we check lactate readings and maybe 5 shows up on the lactate reading, but actually there might have been 10 in the body. But the body turned 5 of that into energy. That's what's really important. So why we train at this LT1 and this LT2 is because that's where we're most efficient at teaching the body to convert the lactate that's being generated into energy and not into waste. Why? Because when it turns into waste, it slows us down. So that's really important to remember throughout this entire talk. Also, what we're trying to do, and what you can do, is manipulate rep length and rep sort of like recovery so that maybe you can go a bit faster. Then as the season goes on, it might be important to you that not only are you quick when you're running at threshold, but maybe that you can run at threshold effort for longer. And that's sort of known as capacity. You could have 2 athletes, and if they do K reps, they have the exact same threshold pace. And maybe they're both going to race a marathon. But then if you go do a 5K rep and you say, run at threshold, suddenly you might have one athlete can run 5K at 3:10 per K, but the other athlete, yes, he could do 1K at the same speed as athlete A, but suddenly he has to go 3:15 pace for 5K. Now, who would you predict then is going to win in a marathon race? That's why it's important to not just work on speed at lactate threshold, but also how long can you run at that speed and stay at sort of thresholdy type effort. And these are all the things that we're going to talk about today. Super important to understand these basics. I think roughly you can run at LT1, which is sort of that first threshold break point. You can run at probably like 1 hour 45, even up to maybe 2.5 hours, 3 hours if you're a really well-trained athlete. I believe that the best marathoners in the world run between LT1 and LT2. They don't race a marathon at LT1. It'll be somewhere in the middle. I know that for sure. I've trained my whole life at this. I know what my LT1 pace is, and it's a bit slower than what I end up racing on marathon day. But I also know that I don't race a marathon as quick as LT2. So it's somewhere in that sort of middle area, which means you can likely run when well trained at LT1 for over 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours, if you extend the training at that LT1. LT2, probably 45 to 60 minutes, again when well trained. That means if you go out tomorrow and your 1K pace at LT2 is, 4 minutes per K, let's pretend, it doesn't suddenly mean that you can run at that pace for 45 minutes to 1 hour. You probably definitely can't, because that's just a 1K rep. You must train the body to be able to run at that sort of effort. We're not talking about pace here, that effort for 45 minutes to 1 hour. You earn it 5 times 6 minutes, 3 times 10 minutes, 4 times 10 minutes, 3 times 15 minutes, 45 minutes in one go. It's a process. It's not instant. It's not given. It's earned. But then what tends to happen is once you go a little bit quicker than that LT2, well then suddenly your body is really struggling to convert the lactate that you're producing into energy, so it dumps heaps of lactate into the body, into the legs, into the arms, and you slow drastically. You only start to slow when that lactate is being dumped into the muscles. When you're using it as energy or when it's being converted as energy, there's no problem. So my session today, I'm running in between that LT1 and LT2. But because I've sort of set the rep length to 1.4 miles, I can run at marathon pace. And so rep length or rep recovery, you can use those to your advantage to control the effort. If I made the reps 4.5 miles, or if I did 6 mile in one go or 7 mile in one go, well then the effort might move above threshold. And so what you're going to have to do, you're going to have to slow down. But maybe at that moment of the season or that time, I have 7 days to go to London Marathon, I don't want to slow down. So you manipulate that rep length plus the recovery time to make sure that you're staying in that sort of thresholdy area. Brilliant way to do it. You can make the rep lengths 400 meters, 800 meters, a K, a mile, 2 mile, etc. But essentially, the more you take off the rep length, of course, the quicker you can go and stay in that effort area. You're looking at this effort being a comfortable pace. So if you're able to run at LT1, it should roughly be what you can run at for possibly even 2 hours when you're trained for that. So that means that if you're able to run at that between 2 hours and probably for me almost up to 3 hours because I've got so efficient in this area, well, it is going to feel pretty comfortable. It can be a frustrating sort of effort to run at. But you'll know that you're at LT1 because you're still able to have that conversation. You're still in a good place. You're not feeling stressed or anxious. You're just in a pretty good place. And you're almost sitting back in your style. You don't have to press. When you move on to sort of LT2, the effort can feel that little bit harder. It's not hard, but it requires a bit more concentration. I think they say like 3 to 4 word answer pace. And this is where perhaps if you're doing a 15-minute rep, a 20-minute rep, you might even start to get a little bit frustrated because it does get pretty difficult. It might be a pace you can hold for 45 minutes to 1 hour on race day, but that's when you're well trained, and that's where we'll get into extending how long you can spend at these thresholds, and that's the next bit that we're chatting about. So obviously today I'm only doing 1.4 miles, but over this entire build-up, I've been gradually lengthening how long I'm running at threshold pace. So at first, I spent a lot of time at LT1 and LT2, and that was kind of shorter reps. It was shorter reps so that we could start to improve the pace that I was running at these thresholds. And you kind of find each week, if you're doing 8 times 1K or 10 times a K at LT2, you find when you come back a week later, you're usually in a better place. It's usually got a little bit quicker. But then if you're going to race a half marathon or a marathon, well, it's important to start extending how long you can run at these efforts. And so, yes, you might be brilliant at 1K or even 2K, but given that your race is either 21K or 42K, you have to start extending how long the body can run at these thresholds. And sometimes that's a psychological thing, but sometimes it's just a physiological thing or even a physical thing that maybe leg strength starts to let you down, or how your body tolerates heat and things like this, or fueling. And so sometimes when you're slowing, it's not just because you're not fit enough to run at that pace for that length. Sometimes it can be all sorts of things like tiredness, freshness, fueling, heat outside, etc. Where am I in life, etc. You gotta think about all these things. So my advice surrounding threshold, at the start of a build-up, you can start with shorter reps and you just make sure that you're repeating this at least once a week. You can do twice a week where you could add some threshold to the start of an interval session, for example. If you're going to do hills or you're going to do some harder reps at VO2, add some threshold work maybe to the start and then maybe to the end. Then as things progress and you start to see it progress, well then what you want to do is start extending how much time you're doing at threshold. So at first, if it was 8 times 3 minutes, that's 24 minutes. Maybe that's 24 minutes a week. You could maybe push that to 40 minutes per week and break it up in different ways. 2-minute reps, 5-minute reps, etc. As your program starts to go on, you can make those 10-minute reps, 15-minute reps. You can chop and change between LT1 and LT2 and just start to develop a feel for it. I use it throughout my entire build-up because threshold is running, right? Threshold pace, threshold intensity, that system, that is running. The quicker you can run at your most efficient rate, the quicker you will be on race day, so long as you still allow space for those specific harder sessions. And that's where threshold feeds the rest of your running program. If you just do threshold, you'll get really good at threshold. But you must also keep the other things in place like VO2 max or big marathon specific days or maybe 5K specific days, whatever you're training for, and keep pushing your ceiling that little bit higher. Some people fall in the trap of just doing threshold, just doing easy runs, and then suddenly they get threshold paced to a good place, and that's awesome, that's the hard work done. But then all they maybe needed to do was add in some VO2 max work, some hills, some harder intervals, and they could have pushed race pace even higher. So don't neglect those harder days and make sure they tie in with your program. Super, super important. So I've shared a lot today on threshold, and perhaps you might use it in your training. Super, super important. You can go to joggingroom.com. That's where the merchandise is. It's now live. It's now in Ireland. It'll be shipped out really quickly. There's also tips on there about nutrition, psychology, recovery, strength conditioning, and training plans. So please do check that out. It helps support me, and it really helps to support the channel. But I just want you to enjoy what you're doing. Everything I'm trying to teach you is to help you be a little bit better at running, but just enjoy it more and perhaps understand what it takes to get a really good result out of yourself on race day, and then hopefully you can go do it. But take care.